So this is the second part of your lecture on informative speaking. We're going to be picking up where you've already selected your topic for your informative speech. So now it's time to talk about organizing your informative speech. We're going to be reviewing the best pattern for you to choose, techniques for you to use so that your audience better understands your subject, how to create your thesis and use your main points to help your audience understand your message. And most people are going to recall less than half of what you are talking about in your speech. So it's important for you to start strong and communicate right up front what your subject is and what they will learn. And then, of course, end by summarizing your main points in your speech. And so that's important. And also, in order for them to understand and maybe keep up with you as you move through your speech, during your main points, you want to kind of trim your material and make sure that you focus on communicating that main point that you are wanting to get across as part of your thesis. We're going to be talking about incorporating some basic speech making techniques that can motivate the audience to keep them with you and throughout your speech and keep their attention. You're going to be preparing a well-organized introduction that clearly communicates your thesis and previews your main points and summarizes your conclusion. You want to set up your subject clearly at the beginning of your speech. You're going to be using, liberally, you're going to be using transitional words and phrases. Now you can use the first, second, and third, but in this class you're pretty far along, so you might consider using transitions that are a little bit more conversational. So things like to start, next, I'll be now moving on to, or finally. You want to use examples, rhetorical questions, analogies. We're going to be choosing the best pattern to help you organize your speech, and using presentational aids. You want to be able to use a simple PowerPoint, maybe a chart or a graph, or some sort of props. So let's go into patterns. There are several different ways to organize your speech, and your topic may lend itself to a specific pattern. So you want to choose which pattern works best to communicate your main idea. So you can organize your speech in one of 5 different patterns. So those 5 different patterns are topical, chronological, cause and effect, comparative, and narrative. Your book uses an example that I find is a good topic as we go through these patterns to help you understand each one. And so I'm going to use that same example to show you how you put these patterns into practice. And that example was a speech about the Impressionist art movement. Now, Impressionism is an art movement which began in the mid-19th century. It was a really radical departure from the classical movement before that. The artists that are most often identified as leaders of that Impressionist movement were Monet, Degas, Renoir, and Manet. Now, Impressionism is known for its short brushstrokes, which gave the paintings a kind of an unfinished quality, but it's much more different than the more realistic paintings and everything that made up the classical period. And it was also known for landscapes. And in order to paint these landscapes, the artists actually worked outside with their easels. They did not typically work in studios, which is also very different. And the Impressionist movement, it really focused on things that are part of everyday life. It was more modern. It focused on women who were in the act of doing everyday things. And that's very much opposed to the classical period subjects of women in Greek and Roman times and mythology. So those patterns of informational speech. Topical. This is organizing your speech by categories. That example would be your main points would cover the different types of Impressionist work, from landscapes to scenes of everyday life to sculpture. Chronological. The main points, chronological, are arranged in a sequence that follows a timeline. It can also be presenting information in a natural order. So our example here would be arranging your points historically to show the art movement's earliest period to the point where it fell out of favor. Cause and effect. Showing the relationship between the topic and a resulting action. So for example, you could demonstrate how the Impressionist movement began as a reaction to the art movement that preceded it. Comparatively. This is defining your subject by using a comparison to similar or opposite subjects. So our example here would be describing the Impressionist movement with an example that compared it to other movements, such as like Cubism or Classical, to demonstrate the similarities or the difference between the two. Narrative. Now, this is organizing your speech in a story format. You might share your own personal experience or story with narrative format. So you might share your own personal experience with viewing Impressionist work, or how you came about, understanding Impressionist work, or what you like about Impressionist work. That would be one way to use a narrative. Another way would be to share the story of one of the artists that are actually part of that movement. So those are the different patterns for informative speeches. Now, it's not very likely that you would stick just with one, because you're probably going to use multiple patterns, and some examples of that might be with our example of Impressionism. We might do a speech where we present Impressionism from a chronological order that showed kind of the history of how Impressionism came to be, and we also might include examples of the really stark difference between Impressionism and other types of art, such as the Cubism. So that's also a comparative pattern for your speech. So that would be a combination of two. So let's move on to some techniques you can use to help your audience better understand your subject and see the relevance to them personally. Now, these are techniques you've already used in other speeches, so we're just going to kind of do a reminder of this. And those techniques are examples, analogies, and rhetorical questions. So examples, this is fairly easy to understand. You would demonstrate the Impressionist period by showing examples of some of the artwork during that time. And analogies. This is when you use a comparison to help your audience better understand your subject. So using comparisons with our subject would be showing how different the Impressionism is from Classical by offering similar comparisons to something else, like by comparing the difference between network news and cable news programming. Rhetorical. Rhetorical questions pose questions to the audience that you don't necessarily expect any sort of response or answer from them. It's usually presenting a situation that they can identify with, or maybe they've experienced themselves. So for this example, I might pose a rhetorical question, such as, what if you walked into a bookstore and every single book in that bookstore was a book about history? Would you want to find books that had, work on more current subjects or fiction? That's how Impressionism changed the art movement, with works that showed everyday life, more modern people, instead of the scenes of Roman or Greek history or mythology. So let's get into the actual outline or organizing your speech. From the very start of a speech of information, you want to gain their audience's attention, pique their interest, and then you also want them to accept you as a credible speaker for that particular subject. You should do all of these things in your introduction. So no matter what type of speech or what your speech is presenting, what your topic is, you always want to open with a way that grabs your audience's attention. But when giving a speech of information, you want your audience to understand how that subject applies to them, what they will know at the end of the speech. They also need to accept you as a credible source right from the beginning. So capturing your audience's attention. Some of the techniques you can use for that would be opening with a question, sharing a story, sharing your own personal experience, telling a joke. Those are all different ways to capture your audience's attention. And your thesis in an informative speech will represent your central idea that you want to communicate to your audience. In your thesis, you should make clear what your subject or topic is and what they will learn or know by the end of your speech. So, your preview. So, in your preview, you've already stated your topic and your thesis and what they expect to gain from that. But in your preview, you want your audience to know how your subject is going to apply to them or what they have to gain from your presentation. Now, how is that different than what I just described in your thesis? It's different because it's not just about what they're going to learn, but why learning it is important to them. So you're going to prove your credibility also as part of your introduction in your preview, and of course preview your main points. So now I've been kind of emphasizing credibility, so let's talk about that a little bit, because unlike your speech of introduction or your special occasion speech, giving a speech of information, it's important that the audience recognize your credibility from the very beginning. In these speeches, your goal is to impart your knowledge, to share your knowledge. So your audience needs to accept you as knowledgeable or to have the credentials to speak on that subject. I mean, would you want to listen to a speech from a speaker about how to read when that speaker themselves doesn't know how to read? I mean, of course you would not. So, I mean, that's kind of an extreme example, but that's an example of why it's important for your audience from right at the beginning to understand that this is a subject you're speaking on that you have personal knowledge or experience with. Your main points. Now, your main points in your speech of information, you're going to want to make sure they're pretty concise, maybe even more so than other speeches. Your main points are going to, of course, support your thesis. But you also want to be demonstrating your subject using some visual aids, probably. So keep this in mind. When using visual aids in your speeches, it's going to take more time. It's going to take more time to go through those main points. So keep that in mind and make sure that you're going to stay within your time limit. So if you're going to be giving a speech that is maybe slightly unfamiliar to your audience, remember you're not going to use terms they're unfamiliar with or phrases. So if some terms or phrases are those that your audience might not be as familiar with, you're going to want to define those right from the beginning in your preview before you even get to your main points. And then stay on track with your main points. Now, when you're passionate about something or something you have experience with or you're interested in, it can be pretty easy to communicate that passion as you're going through your main points, which can kind of lead you to maybe get off track from what they specifically need to know. So you don't want to expand on too much information that may be unnecessary to adequately inform your audience. So make sure that you're keeping just the information that's necessary for them to be interested, but also stay within that time limit and not expand too much. Transitions. By now you should know how to incorporate transitions in your speeches and understand the importance of transitions to keep your audience's attention. And while it's acceptable to use transitions like first, second, and third, at this point, try to be more conversational with your transitions. You might use transitions like, let's start by, now that we've explained X, let's move on to Y, and our final step is. So speaking of final steps, now we're going to talk about conclusion. Remember to summarize your main points in your conclusion and close with impact. You can remind your audience what it is you wanted them to know and how they could apply what they know in their everyday life. You can also have a call to action in your informative speech. That is okay, and it's something that you might actually want to do. You just want to make sure that that call to action does not cross the line into advocating. So, for instance, with our speech of the Impressionist period, we might wrap up by suggesting that your audience go to a museum and see an exhibit on Impressionism. That would just mean applying what you've taught them in a way that can then further their knowledge about your subject. So that's not really advocating. So I'm going to wrap up this lecture now, and let's review the process of organizing your speech that we've just gone through. So to successfully organize your informative speech, you're going to want to choose a pattern. Now, whether that's topical, chronological, cause and effect, comparative or narrative, or a combination of those patterns. You're going to use techniques like examples or analogies or a rhetorical question. You want to let your audience know how your subject or your topic will benefit them or be relevant to them. You want to make sure your audience accepts you as a credible source from the very beginning by demonstrating your knowledge or experience with that. Keep your main points clear and concise, and use the transitions in a way to keep your audience engaged as you move through those main points. Also keep in mind, most people are going to remember the beginning or the end of your speech. So you want to make sure you start off strong and make sure they understand what your topic is and how it's going to apply to them and what they're going to learn. And then also you want to make sure you summarize your main points in your conclusion. Now, I've pulled together a few links to videos that you can watch of informative speeches, just like I did in your lecture part 1. And there's going to be some notes on this speech, this lecture, that I'm going to post in Canvas as a file, and the URL links for those videos are going to be included in that. I'm also going to include those links and the file with the notes when I send out your announcement about the fact that the video has been posted. So I'll be doing that in both places. Now, a few of you have let me know what your speech topics are for approval, but you really need to get to me your speech topic for approval. You need to email that to me, and then I can email you back with some feedback or with approval. Please don't wait until the day before their speech is due or the night before. You need to give me at least 24 hours to see your email and respond, especially if you're going to be doing this over a weekend. As a reminder, you're going to be, of course, videotaping these speeches. Unfortunately, you're not going to have an audience to present this to. So I had a student that contacted me and asked me about eye contact when we're going to be doing video. So what you need to know and what I expect from you with this is for your eye contact should focus on your video camera or on your phone that you're using to videotape. I'm going to be your audience, so I don't want you to be giving your presentation and be trying to scan the room as you're doing your speech, because you don't have an audience for that. So just focus your eye contact on me. However, I do expect you to be using natural gestures, voice variety, speak up so that I can hear you. And if you're using props, to make sure you're using those in a natural way and that you're comfortable using those. So that's kind of the way I expect you to make a connection with your audience, since we're going to be doing this by video. Now, I'd like for you to be posting your videos on YouTube and then sending me the link, emailing me the link to that video so I can view it and then grade it. Please make sure that you have that video posted and you send me the link on the day that it's due or before. If YouTube's not an option for you for some reason, I believe you can actually upload those videos on Canvas. You can also use something like Dropbox. I can work with you on that, that's fine. I just find YouTube maybe to be the best way, because I think we're all maybe familiar with YouTube and there wouldn't be any sort of learning curve with that. When I talk about learning curve, I'm specifically talking about me more than you. So that's some suggestions about how we're going to continue and how your speeches are going to be presented, and then allow me to see them for grading. Now, if you have any questions as we move through this, any question you might have, please email me. It's best if we can kind of keep in contact with each other. So when I'm ready to be posting the next video, which is going to be your video on persuasion, when that video is posted, I'm going to send out an announcement about that for you, and probably even send you an email out, and so that you can view that video on YouTube. Now, something else I'd like, and I'll mention this in the announcement, I see that we've got a number of people that are viewing the video, but I want to continue to see that you're participating in this class. So what I'd like you to do is, when you view the video on YouTube, just please comment with your name. That's all I need to see. So when you view the video, comment and say Kathy Catron. So I know that you were there and you viewed the video. So that's a way for me to know that you're participating in the class. So I'll let you know when the next video is posted. And like I said, let's just stay in communication. Thank you.